We are happy to be here together. Thank you very much for the invitation, and that this, it was a coincidence, or what shall I say? It was a good chances that in the end this evening turns out to be like it will be. So Michelle and I, we met in September in Vienna and started with a very intense conversation. We actually want to go on now with you. And Michelle had at the MAC the lecture about René Harnoncourt, The Art of Installation, this wonderful book that was just mentioned before. I knew the book already, but the lecture was fantastic because this focus on, I would say, the background, the where all his different approaches come together were so clearly presented in these different chapters you showed within this lecture. And me as an architect, and me also as an architect who is doing also exhibition design, it was of course very inspiring. And also these certain attitudes or working methods where I thought it's very combined, or it's very connected with starting points we are also having in our own work as architects, because we do exhibition design coming from the side of an architect, which is a completely different approach that when someone is coming from the side as a curator and more art historian, or I would say art lover. So that's what we want to talk about, and we prepared a bit, but in the end it's all about coincidence and about just jumping into the talk.
Exactly. And with that, I'll do what you did to stand and say, good evening, everyone. There certainly are quite a lot of people here. We're thrilled that you joined us tonight. And I just personally want to give a huge thank you to Rosanna and Vero. This exhibition was a collaborative effort. And it really reinforces to me how great things can happen when you put people together and exchange information and ideas, particularly when you're coming from maybe different professional backgrounds, points of view, or work in different kinds of institutions. Bringing all of that together makes for a beautiful soup, if you will. So thank you so much for the opportunity and the kind words. Marie-Therese. So indeed, we met in Vienna, and I had the great occasion to visit the Heidi Horton collection with Marie-Therese, which is a beautiful museum which had recently opened and which she designed. And we spent some time touring through the exhibition space, which is just lovely. And we had this just impulsive, ongoing dialogue about, how do you present the spaces in a museum? How do you present the works of art? And this, that, and the other. And she would say something, and I said, well, that's so interesting, because René Harnoncourt would have thought the same thing about this, or would have approached it maybe this way, but a little differently. And we could not stop talking. So that is also part of the impulse of trying to share that with you tonight. And I will say Marie-Therese is so courageous that she wanted this to be, we both want it to be a dialogue, but she has not seen the slides. So I have chosen the images as a prompt for our conversation. So you ready?
I am.
Marie-Therese, ich glaube, dein Mikro ist nicht eingeschaltet.
Doch, on, green. Yes, I am. No? No? Ah, very, okay.
So we thought we'd begin by talking in exhibition design about sequences of spaces. We know that this is something that Harnoncourt spent a great deal of time thinking about. As you know, when you're putting together an exhibition, you have to think about, if you will, a spatial choreography, or as Eleni was just talking us about the scenography. Thinking about the circulation path through a gallery space, through an exhibition space, and what that can impart to the understanding of the works of art. And what I love is that certainly we know some curators were just kind of thinking about this in their head, or just thinking about putting works, at least at MoMA, on the wall in chronological order. But Harnoncourt, is revealed through his drawings, thought very deeply about this, to the extent that he actually drew out how you'd be moving through the space. He thought deeply about how the human body would actually circulate through that physical environment. And I can tell you from my experience in the MoMA archives, at this sort of era, the records of exhibitions from around the same time, it's very infrequent that we have a floor plan at all for the exhibitions, much less here you can see the Harnoncourt really carefully considering it by drawing it out himself. And I just love that if you follow this green line, you can see how he's kind of mapping out the spaces from one gallery to another. And a little bit later, we'll talk about the views between the galleries.
So. Now, I think this is a plan which is really having a clear walk through the space. He also did other exhibitions where you also could, you didn't have to stay on track, where you could go different ways. So in exhibitions, the storytelling is a main thing, or it's about the story you want to tell with the objects, and somehow also within embedding these objects in a kind of scenario that is supporting the story. He liked to do it a lot also with color and light, so with all senses. That was our title we took for this little talk we have together, because all elements have to do, either is it walking through space, like a film, like a narrative, like these sequences he was really precisely thinking about, or even if it was not just one track but different tracks, then he was also interested how would be this interconnection. And for me, this is a very architectonical way also to look at things, and I think this thinking in spatial sequences, even if we talk about Kiesler, it was a big thematic for Kiesler, and I think this was a very nice intro. Thank you very much to all these fantastic architects, mainly architects who were doing also exhibition design. I also learned that Ellisitsky, who was also within this time, also working on dissolving somehow this classical situation of wall and object, but trying to opening up to think more about having different views onto something. And I think within this, and I think the awareness of René Harnoncourt was very strong in this kind of like a film where you walk through and tell a story with the objects, because they were always the most important for him.
Here we'll share with you another example for his Ellie Nodelman exhibition. So this is a sense where you can see a little bit of what I think you were just referring to, that you can make connections in multiple pathways. And he's identifying the different kind of influences or styles, whether it's more folk art or Hellenistic or neoclassical. I thank you for mentioning Liszewski, and Eleni, I thank you. It was a really wonderful presentation and a very good grounding for the conversation today. It is amazing to see the history of exhibition installation. And what I want to say from my point of view is, just to be clear, I am not a specialist on exhibition installation as the field writ large. What happened in my experience is that as head of the archives at MoMA, I had begun to learn about how important René Harnoncourt was as a museum director. He was actually director of MoMA for 20 years, in addition to curating shows and in designing and installing some others. And so I thought my job was to get his papers in order, because they were not in very great shape. So I did a project to have them inventoried. And as I'm reviewing the work, all of a sudden the archivist keeps showing me, she's like, did you know there's hundreds upon hundreds of his drawings for exhibitions? And I was like, no, I had no idea. And so through that project, we were able to identify all the marvelous works that you're seeing tonight. And they just drew me in. Like this circulation plan, which I feel like is a cornerstone of the exhibition. I just love this drawing. It draws you in. I mean, I can't imagine someone spending so much time thinking about not just how you'd move through this space, but actually sketching in the little objects you're going to encounter along the way. And so for me, this represents almost like a walking into Harnoncourt's practice, and that's kind of how I got enticed by this whole subject.
Yeah, wonderful that you were jumping into all these special, let's say, drawings and all this archive material that you found, because we all didn't know what was hiding. And I think these are all drawings, I would say thinking drawings, you know, you're drawing, and by the way, you're always walking through it, you're telling the story, you know, you have all the objects in your head, and he especially, because he was drawing before, he was drawing all the objects to understand the objects, to find maybe the specific, to understand the specific of the object, and maybe knowing then I want to have it in the exhibition or not, and knowing what he wants to highlight to make it visible for the people. Because he was strongly working with the light, he was strongly, and I'm always thinking about this drawing intensity he's doing with the objects, but he's also doing, of course, with this thinking about how to organize it, and everything also has a kind of, let's say, a kind of aesthetic quality, you know, which is so important as architects when we are drawing. I think each drawing also should have a certain kind of quality, because it's important, you know, to think in a surrounding with quality. And this is very, I think, impressing, and for me interesting, because we, for example, as architects, we always start drawing and the space we should exhibit parallel to the object. So for us, the space is actually the main thing we want to capture for the exhibition, and then of course we want to understand the objects. And here it's the second, you know, he's first dealing with the objects, then he's selecting, and then he's grouping, and then he's going into the space, and this is the moment he's going into space. And for us, there's always a lot of drawings already in understanding the space. And parallel talking with the curator about the object. So I think it's just, the curatorial point of departure and maybe an architectonical point of departure, which is meeting, because in the end, the result is always an exhibition. So we jump into the next.
Yes, and he's thinking about that interplay from object to object, and the best way to display them individually, but then also to express the relationship. He had his whole methodology in thinking about this. He used the word affinities. In his writings, he mentions this over and over again, that he's looking to put objects together by affinity, and that could be formal, like you're seeing here. This is a section of an exhibition that the section head is volume and form, so looking at formal properties. Or another section of this show was called Stylization and Content, where he writes about talking about the religious energy of the works that he's put together. And as a side note here, oops, there we go. This looks a little more religious energy, perhaps, than the latter. And what I think is also interesting for us today is that Harnoncourt was interested in pairing together works of art from different time periods and different cultures. And I think that's something that we can see today happening a lot, this sort of trend of trans-historical curation, particularly at like international biennials and whatnot. And so I think it's interesting just to think about him engaging in that way.
I think this focus is really dealing also about this importance of shows, of exhibitions, of experiencing one-to-one. Because during Corona there was a lot of possibilities via VR, you had lectures, you had guiding tours you could see a lot. There were interesting things. But the one-to-one experience, and I think we also I saw the exhibition today the first time, and I think it's a very delicate, I would say delicate exhibition, because so thoughtful about certain things, and one could feel it, this preciseness, when you're in this space. And the color and the light and the composition and the way how things are put together, all these elements make this experience strong. And I think for René Harnoncourt, and this is very fantastic, and I really would love to really walk through one of his exhibitions, because it's always different, and to see these images and see the photographs, and because there was color, there was light, there were big vitrines, installations, but in the center there was always the object for him. And I like this saying, which is also in the exhibition, when you make, the exhibition design, but if the people come out, you want that the people remember the objects. You want them to remember the objects. And I think that's very true. Which doesn't mean that there shouldn't be an exhibition design. It means that the exhibition design is always, let's say, a background. It's something, even a strong background, to give you a kind of understanding, a kind of, position of seeing, of understanding, of perceiving. And this is a whole universe, I think, which is yeah, the essence actually of exhibition making, and so important for the one-to-one.
I think that's a perfect segue. I'm going to show you 2 slides here, because I think Harnoncourt, earlier in his career, as he's developing his methodology, he actually recognizes that, in his opinion, one needs to develop a new display method, and he goes so far as to write a very long application for a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. So they would support research into this, and I'm showing you 2 pages from the original grant application, and you can see he's already saying we need to think about ways to show the comparisons between objects within sections and across. And this is very specifically looking at art from different cultures, but looking how trends or formal comparisons might translate across cultures. And this is another drawing from that. So you can see he's first of all, developing new display devices. So he's bringing the walls down halfway. The vitrines that you see on the right, you might see some plexi on the front, sorry, but they're not covered on the top. It's almost like he wants your eye to kind of jump and cascade and hopscotch over the objects into the next gallery. And he's using the shape of the fan as a formal device to kind of interconnect. So I think that's I'm just fascinated that he wrote a grant proposal, for this. And Eleni, thank you for reading that quote. The quote about I was going to bring it up. In life, we don't learn things necessarily the way you learn things from a book, 1 page at a time in order. You kind of walk through life and there's things in the periphery and things that come out of left field that knock you, and that's how you learn. And that quote is from this grant application. Those are his words. Do you have anything, or next?
Yeah, no, I just think about limits, and he was interested in opening up limits or having these reading things in a kind of double from different perspectives, which I think this opening up, because sometimes maybe the display still has a more classical kind of how it looks like, but from the idea and how it's in the end how it's done, it's very opening up. It's a lot about open thinking of and fluid space, and seeing objects from different sides and over a longer distance and so on. So I think this is a big quality, his storytelling, where he is taking down the boundaries of some walls and using them even to make it stronger, that there is maybe a limit between 2 different elements, but it's also connecting. And so he is, you can also stress things with this kind of spatial gestures. Yeah. That's what he did a lot, yeah.
Indeed. And as we've been saying, he really prioritized the viewer's experience in the space. And as our colleague Vero is always quick to remind us, he really kind of anticipated this whole practice or philosophy or approach of narrative environment, or thinking about the user experience today. And I just want to show a couple of examples. Eleni mentioned his vistas. Again, this was his word for how he would draw the galleries as he intended to install them. It's important to remember that all of these are preparatory drawings before the installation. And it is wonderful because if you look carefully, if you look upstairs, between the drawings and the photographs, they don't always match. So you can see that in the field, the curator always has the ability to change things at the last minute. But what I like is he's not just drawing the works of art, but you can see he's drawing in the viewer. How will the viewer feel in that space? Or in here, again, you can see the figure in front of the column, but not only are you seeing the person in relation to the space, if you look carefully at the bottom, it's a little scratch of the floor plan. So he's trying to think, where is that person exactly at that moment? And similarly here, in just a nice traditional rendering, you see the visitors to the galleries.
For me, it always has such a playful way, these drawings. I mean, this is now more constructive drawing, but all the others, they have such a playful way where you think someone is sitting and, you know, deciding to do it like this or that, trying out. Of course, a big chance if you have the skills, you know, to do this in this way. But for me, very playful, and therefore I have the feeling that all this, the layouts, this playful way in trying out, is something which is really was driving his work, and made it also so open, because it was changing, you know, from one to another, depending, of course, what the content was, because about the native arts, of course, was completely different context than making the exhibition for Pablo Picasso's objects and paintings. So it's, of course, a completely different way of what kind of narrative you want to say. So that's I think very interesting. This playful way you can feel also in his displays. I enjoy.
Me too. But of course, before he's playful, let's go back to the process. So how does he get there? Well, we've mentioned it, and certainly you've seen it upstairs, so this is or downstairs from here. It's no surprise to you all. But he definitely was engaged with direct observation of the work of art. That is the core basic tenet of how his process is anchored. Showing you here a beautiful drawing from his Arts of the South Seas exhibition. What I find so fascinating is he would do these either from direct observation, or sometimes he would even do these drawings from memory. There's a great anecdote that he accompanied Nelson Rockefeller on a visit to Los Angeles, and they looked at like over 100 works of indigenous art and artifacts, because Nelson Rockefeller was building a collection of native arts. Nelson purchased 75 of those objects, and the two of them flew home back to New York City, which is a red-eye overnight flight. Nelson Rockefeller slept. René Harnoncourt sketched from memory all 75 objects, and when Nelson awoke, he was playing with the drawings, moving them around, saying like, oh, look, we could exhibit them this way in this order. So it's like the man was just born with this ability. I'm just showing a few other images of the single object drawings, and even something so simple. I have so very few lines, so the economy of this drawing, but it really, I think, captures the essence of that work.
It was interesting because this obsession, I mean, this is of course a talent of drawing he had, but on the other hand also this obsession of getting to know these objects.
Yeah.
Because even if you have the skill of drawing, you don't have to be, because it took most of the time doing an exhibition was in understanding these objects. And I think this is a very essential, that he really was obsessed somehow to find where the inner core of message for these objects are. And there were a lot of objects of the indigenous people from different countries, because he was starting with the Mexican, then coming to America, dealing with the Indian art. So he jumped into this world of exhibiting very strongly through, I would say, native art. He visited directly on different locations, meeting these people, this culture, and therefore I think there was this finding out what the object, and this was the object itself, and the artistic approach of each object was for him the main importance. Mm-hmm. Even if he was telling about cultural background and things like this, it was always about the quality of the object and the artistic of the object, and therefore it didn't matter if it was native art or it was modern art, where he found out a lot of connections. For him it was all on the same level of value of art, you know, and I think this is very special, and I think through this drawing is something like trying to understand. And I just can say as an architect, you know, when you're dealing with a new site or something, you know, this drawing, getting to know, also going there, finding things, drawing again, it's also something where you can discover. Drawing can discover something, and I think it's very important with different tools. You don't only have with the pencil, you just have to deal with it, you know. And I think this is very strong in architecture and in design, and just to be intense with something. And he was. So I love these drawings and groupings, and I think it's amazing.
Yes, so he went from the single objects, as you all know now, to the group drawings, to the vista, to the final installation. And I do love, talk about playful, these female figures sitting on some pedestals with some drapery. It's kind of a little bit odd, but hey, it's MoMA. This is our concluding section. We've talked about, like, with all senses. I also like to think of it, thinking about MoMA's history, especially in the earlier decades. My other subtitle is for this section is Beyond the White Cube. Harnoncourt was not afraid of color. He was very interested in using it for atmospheric effect. I love that he actually went so far as to do a color chart sort of wheel to, like, look at how the colors would interact with one another, be complementary, etc. This is for his Arts of the South Seas exhibition, and he specifically said that he wanted to employ color for, quote, symbolic effect, to heighten the exhibition narrative or to just showcase individual objects. And the way that plays out, I'll show you just a couple images before I let you jump back in. So here he was saying he employed the yellow on the wall to evoke sand of the tribal communities that lived on coastlines. And his vista there. And I love to share this because this is an actual installation photograph of some of the galleries, and so you can see that yellow again. But what's really incredible about this is the only color installation photography we have for MoMA exhibitions until, like, the late 60s or early 70s. So it's really remarkable that we have that. In other areas of the exhibition, he employed the color green to evoke the peoples who inhabited the jungle areas. Maybe I'll just finish out the slides and then you can respond to all of them, or you want to stop with color or paint? No, color? Keep going. Okay. He also, it was really wonderful to see, he played with fabrics. We saw the fabrics on the pedestals before. Here you can see swatches that he's considering for curtains to frame specific items, and I love that we have these fabric swatches in the archival files. That's the red that you saw previously that is used as a curtain to highlight the Picasso. And of course, you all know the image since it's on the exhibition poster. And in thinking about Picasso's sort of enormous monumental heads, he actually toiled with the installation. He writes about this, how difficult it was. And his final result, which he was very happy with because he talks about it in interviews, was that he created a rounded wall because he wanted it to have the idea of infinite space that he thought would scale the heads in the best way possible, that if you had a corner, it would be too jarring. And then finally, he was not timid with using lighting as well also. He was interested in theatrical lighting design and took some cues from that. And again, in many cases, he's using it to try to evoke the original context. So what you're seeing here is a darkened gallery that in the niches are displayed masks of Native American masks. And these masks were actually used during ceremonies that were performed around campfires. And so his idea was to light them from below to kind of give that suggestion of the flicker of the firelight coming from below. So that is our final section for you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this is like trying to get this atmosphere of this original, where the masks also develop their mystic, their mystic impact, input. He wants to capture this. So it's like with these drawings, and trying to find this, the light is something very useful in kind of dramatizing situations. I mean, you can do a lot with it, and he was really experimenting with it. For the Picasso exhibition, he had exchanged all lightning, because he said he wants to have the perfect lightning for it. So I think this trying to provoke the object to really the core of their the essence of their expression, with all means somehow that you can maybe understand it with all senses, it's therefore he used the light and the color and the texture, and I know that also acoustic elements were for him something important or something he used. So he was really aware of all different possibilities, and I would be so interested how he would deal now with all the possibilities we have now. What he would do, with our VR and AR possibilities and this intersection between virtual and analog possibilities. I think he would play with it, I'm sure. But I think that he would be the one that never would, want to leave out the one-to-one experience, the direct, because for him this was the experience one-to-one was for him important, to get to know artists, get to know also for the primitive art, all these craftsmen. He went there to get to know these people and to understand space, and then also installation and exhibition spaces. I think he would like to combine it, but he would never want to miss the one-to-one.
Very well said. I think that's our concluding note. Thank you, Marie-Therese.
Thank you, Michelle.
Eleni.